Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity just to share some thoughts and reflections on the legislation before us. Just first of all, at the outset, I want to welcome the bill, which of course I will support. Want to take the opportunity to recognise Minister Humphreys and her officials for bringing it to this point, and also previous ministers like Regina Doherty and previous officials who brought it to the point where we are today. It's not perfect, but I think it's very good and very important and very real progress that we need to make as a state. And I know from my own time as Minister for Social Protection back between 2016 and 2017, it was part of our work programme, part of the pensions roadmap, and it's great to see so much has been done by the Minister, her team and others, including the work that's being done particularly on the flexible pension age. And I know the amount of work and the amount of time that comes into doing all these things and taking into account all the different submissions and all the different conflicting opinions. I think actually it was Seamus Brennan about 25 years ago who first moved to doing this. So it's certainly been in the pipeline for a very long time, and in many ways isn't it a pity that we hadn't done it back then, because there now would be people retiring today who have to get by on the state pension alone, who would now have 25 years of pension savings in addition to their state pension. And it's a real shame that sometimes it takes so long to make important reforms like this. I think it's very significant legislation. Once enacted and up and running, this will matter more in 10 years' time or 20 years' time or 30 years' time than it does today. And I see it very much in the same category as the Future Ireland Fund legislation currently being put through the Houses by Minister McGrath, because these are things that will make a big difference for our society and our country, not now, not the next election, not even the one after, but beyond that. And I think it's a good reflection of long-term thinking by the government. We often talk in this House and in politics about the importance of making work pay and rewarding work and rewarding those who make a financial contribution to society. And of course, there are many very valuable ways in which people make a contribution to society, and it isn't always a financial one. But without people making a financial contribution to society, there wouldn't be the funding for education or health or care or security or anything else. And that's why it is important that we reward those who work, pay taxes, and pay into the social insurance system. That can be done in many ways, whether it's higher pay, whether it's lower personal taxation, whether it's better family leave, better benefits like the pay-related benefits that the Minister is bringing through. Also making sure that some of the a lot of state-provided services are not always means-tested, because that can count against the working person. And it's good to see that we have more universal programmes now, like childcare deductions, school books, school meals, reductions in college fees. But I think one of the best ways that we can reward work and make work pay is to make sure that everyone has better pensions. And when this is up and running, every worker will have an occupational pension in addition to their state pension, and that's not the case at the moment. It is in many ways, as the Minister said before, a sort of pensions plus additional retirement savings on top of your state pension. I very much heard what Deputy Naughton said in relation to equality and the impact on women, but I think we have to compare it with three different things: where we are now, where we're going to be, and where things might be perfect. And certainly in terms of equality, this is a big step forward in my assessment. We have a real pension inequality in this state, where people who work in the public service, in big companies, generally have very good pensions, as we all do. Yet people who work in small and medium enterprises, people who are self-employed, people who work for NGOs in the voluntary sector, people who are contractors, like security guards and contract cleaners, for example, home helps, they rarely have any pension at all, in addition to their state pension. And many of those, or most of those, are lower paid people. Most of them are women, are part-time. And for the first time, they're going from having no state pension to having something in addition to state pension. So I think it is a step forward in that regard, certainly from where we are. And I think back to the disputes over the CE scheme, supervisors' pensions, for example. That dispute wouldn't have arisen had we done this 25 years ago, because they would have had a pension. And if you think of all the people who now work in drugs task forces or local development companies or home helps or voluntary bodies or security guards, all of those people would have had pensions now. and in many cases the contribution would have been an indirect contribution from the state as not their employer, but as the funder of the organisations which they work for. And I think also it can be useful in giving people a feeling that they have a greater stake in society. You know, somebody with a relatively modest income will be able to build up pension savings, a pension pot of 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 over the course of their working life. And I think that'll help people think differently about money, think differently about taxation, think differently about markets. If markets go up, the value of their pension pot will go up. Company profits, they will get a benefit from them too. A lot of people feel they get no benefit from that at the moment because very often they don't, other than through corporation profit tax. Interest rates will be thought about differently. People will think more about bond yields and the solvency of states. So it'll get people thinking in a different way, I believe, about the state and society if everyone, and everyone will, have savings on retirement of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of euros. It's a bit like becoming a homeowner. When somebody becomes a homeowner, they fundamentally see things differently, just like they see things differently once they become a parent. And I think everyone having savings of hundreds of thousands of euros on retirement will make people think differently and in a better way in the round for our society. We are relatively late coming to the table on this. The UK has had auto-enrolment for quite some time. Singapore has had it for decades. In Australia, anyone who's lived and worked in Australia will tell you about Super Ann, a system they've had in place for a very long time for all workers. New Zealand has the Kiwi Saver. And I think in one OECD report, they indicated that we are one of only a very small number of countries, perhaps the only one, that doesn't have some form of system like this. So it is very much overdue. For our to offer any advice to the Minister is push back against any attempts to delay this. I can understand the temptation heading into elections that this could be awkward and people might see money coming out of their pockets and let's put it off. And I understand the pressures that SMEs and small companies are when it comes to rising costs. But there are ways around these things. And certainly when it comes to the impact on business, the Low Pay Commission, for example, could take this into account in their recommendation for next year on the minimum wage, and I think they should, because this is pay, albeit deferred pay. And I think there's a risk that if it were put off, leave it to 26 or 27, that a new minister or even a new government might be less enthusiastic about this, and there's a risk that a window of opportunity to get this done, which was missed in the past, could be missed again. And I'd really like to state that very strongly. I do think it is important that it is a personal pension pot, personal retirement savings that belong to people. It's not like the National Pension Reserve Fund. The government can't rate it. And I think that's the other side of there not being a government guarantee. It does belong to you. It is your private property. Could never be rated by the government in the event of a crisis. And giving people a choice on their own investments, I think, is important as well. And it's one of the reasons why I think we should guard against a government guarantee or excessive government involvement in how the investments are made. I think Deputy Knock to make some very valid points that do need to be answered in relation to people being able to make additional or higher contributions. You know, why would we stop people doing that if they and their employer wanted to? And also in relation to maternity leave. We know the good work that's been done by government in recognising breaks in people's PRSI contributions in relation to care, for example. Why not fix that now and find a mechanism by which people can make contributions while they're on maternity leave or while, for example, they're taking care leave for some reason. In relation to younger workers, I actually think 23 is reasonable, and provision is there for people to opt in before 23 if they want to, so it's not that they can't. It's just that a cut-off point has been chosen for reasons that seem logical to me, but younger full-time workers could opt in, requiring somebody who maybe is only working part-time while a student to opt out probably doesn't make a huge amount of sense. I know the trade unions have raised some issues in relation to anomalies around people who have PRSAs already. I'm not sure if they're correct about that, but I think that would need to be answered, because it would be terribly unfair if people who had set up a PRSA were then disadvantaged in some way as a result of that. I think we should avoid any calls to allow people to dip into their funds too early. That would undermine the whole purpose of it. I understand the thinking behind that, but would undermine the whole purpose of people having pension savings if they could dip into it for other reasons. And I do think the issue around tax treatment really does have to be clarified. And whatever is done, I know it's going to be done in the Finance Act, but let's not make it a reason to put this off because it can't be sorted out by the Finance Act, which is 6 months away, so there's plenty of time for it to be considered. And certainly we can't have a double taxation arrangement where it's taxed on the way in and the way out. So it has to be one or the other. That wouldn't be fair. And whatever is done in terms of tax and state support for it needs to be roughly equivalent to what's done, I think, in terms of other pensions, or it'll fall into real difficulties. One tiny other point. In the legislation, local authority members are prohibited from being members of the board. We ran into that issue in other legislation. I don't necessarily see why that should be the case. The Minister doesn't have to appoint councillors, but shouldn't be prevented from. And I kind of wonder why that's there. It's been taken out in relation to other legislation. And then also the whole issue around the 20,000, that it's income over 20,000. Will that create a step effect? And we know what all the problems other step effects cause, where all of a sudden, just because you earn €1 over 20,000, you actually end up being worse off in terms of your take-home pay. So just need to think about the step effect there. And then finally, what wasn't clear from reading the explanatory memorandum is what happens with people who maybe only work in Ireland for 2 or 3 years. Migrants who come here for 2 or 3 years and work, or it's 4 years, and then leave and don't come back. Or people perhaps who emigrate themselves and they're Irish people and only pay for a few years into the scheme. Is there a way for them to capitalise that and take their savings back, if you like, or do they have to wait until they're 65, even though they might have been somebody who just came to Ireland to work for a few years in their 20s, or somebody who left Ireland in their 20s and doesn't come back here to retire? Thank you.